when you've done all you can.
Okay, so this is going on right now. A disciplinary hearing for a police officer in the York region. This guy, a black police officer, shows up at a field party where he's called the N-word several times. And one of the people there says, we should lynch that N-word officer. The officer files his notes after they make the arrests and do everything, and they charge one guy. And he says, I was called some racial slurs in his notes. But then he runs into the same guy a couple of weeks later and the guy says, if it wasn't for your badge and that gun on you right now, I would beat the you-know-what out of you. He takes that as a threat, as threatening an officer. He arrests the guy. And then, subsequent to that, he is brought up on disciplinary charges within the force because he failed to report the first incident. Even though it was in his notes, I didn't know what he had to report. We're joined right now by... So they're threatening to discipline this black police officer because he didn't whine about being called the N-word. I mean, if you've seen the movie about Jackie Robinson recently, they tell Jackie, to take it and to be a gentleman and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? I think if you're doing your job and you are a police officer, you might have to take whether or not somebody's calling you a pig or any number of different things. It probably comes with the territory. If somebody goes too far, then you might arrest him. Just as this black police officer arrested a guy who said, I would beat the you-know-what out of him. Ross McLean joins us right now. He's a former police officer, crime specialist. He is at the tribunal hearing. Ross, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, good to join you. And great of News Talk 1010 to stay on top of this story from the time it broke. I've heard it discussed on numerous shows to find out just what's going on.
Okay. His brother, the black police officer's brother, says, the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like a witch hunt.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what occurred to me when I first saw it, and I started looking into the case to find the evidence. And, I was suggesting that if the chief who wants to, die on this hill over this topic, it better be a good charge with good reasons for laying it. And I have to say, what I've been able to find out so far about the charges is it's weak, and I can't even believe that they've been laid, Jim.
Well, let me ask you, you were a police officer, and there's got to be a line where you run into people who are going to call you any number of different awful things. You're a pig, why don't you go eat donuts, all that kind of stuff. And, I would think that might have to come with the territory, but when they go over the line, as this person went over the line here and said, if it wasn't for that badge and that gun, I'd come over there and I'd beat the you-know-what out of you, that's a threat.
Yeah, and that's exactly when the officer decided to take actions, is when he was actually threatened. He didn't do it over the words.
And who's deciding his fate? The chief of the police, the York Regional Police?
Well, this is the other thing. The chief is the one who asked for him to be investigated. Then the chief decided to lay the charges against him. The chief is the one who pays for the prosecution. The person who's serving as his adjudicator or his arbitrator is currently a working superintendent who reports to that chief, who's sitting supposedly as an independent hearing officer on this. It's just bizarre. I mean, I don't think any one of us would want to be
Let's go through that again. The chief is effectively the on the side of the prosecution because he asked for the hearing?
He's the one laying the charge, yeah.
And the person who is deciding his fate is somebody who answers to the chief?
Yeah, he's a working superintendent who works for the chief.
Ross McLean is with us. He's a former police officer and a crime specialist. Do you get the feeling that they just didn't like him and maybe it was something else and they're trying to get him on this?
Look, I'm talking to a lot of officers up here, York Regional officers that are up here. Some retired, some very senior positions, who are officers of color themselves, and they're up here supporting the officer because they don't believe that this is the right way to handle the problem this chief is trying to deal with. They think that there should have been some kind of sit-down talk and work it out rather than going to this length. So that's why there's so many people here to support him, Jim.
Ross, great story. Thank you very much for reporting on it. Ross McLean is a former police officer.
After you've done all you can, you just stand